The doorbell had barely stopped ringing when I heard myself say, "I spent it." The words came out before I could think, flat and dull, like I was reading a grocery list out loud. The man in the doorway pulled a leather notebook from his jacket pocket, flipped it open to a page marked with a fountain pen, and asked me to specify exactly how much and on what. I told him the truth. $2,000 on a laptop, $1,200 on clothes, the rest on 2 round-trip tickets to Paris. My sister laughed from the sofa, the sound bright and sharp against the heavy air in the living room. She pointed at me with a coral-colored fingernail and told the detective that he had heard it with his own ears, that I had just confessed to everything. Mother knelt by the kitchen threshold, picking up pieces of the glass she had dropped when the bell rang. Her hands trembled, and a few slivers fell back onto the hardwood floor before she could collect them. She asked how there could be that much cash in the house, her voice climbing high and thin, because they had never kept money like that around, never in all their years of marriage. Father still stood at the open door, one hand gripping the brass knob like he wasn't sure whether to step inside or walk back out into the humid evening. He asked if my boss knew I had taken company money home, and I told him that my boss only knew the money was still in my possession. The detective closed his notebook and informed me that he would need receipts, purchase records, some kind of paper trail to verify what I had just claimed. I told him I had thrown all the receipts away. My sister rose from the sofa, barefoot, stepping over the scattered glass without a single cut on her soles, and she faced the detective with a look of theatrical indignation. She said I was lying, that they should be asking her instead, because she was the one who deserved to have that money in the first place. Father finally pushed the door shut, the latch clicking softly, and the sound made everyone in the room flinch. Mother came back from the kitchen with a broom and dustpan, sweeping the broken pieces into a neat pile. She looked older than I remembered, the lines around her mouth deeper than they had been that morning. She said my name, then stopped, then started again, saying that I had saved that money all summer long, working double shifts and skipping lunches. My sister kicked one of the shopping bags by her feet, sending a silk blouse sliding halfway out of its tissue paper, and told Mother that I had only myself to blame. She said I had always been like that, hiding snacks as a child, hiding allowance money, hiding everything, and now hiding $20,000 in an envelope on my desk was just asking for trouble. The detective cleared his throat and asked my sister to explain why she believed the money rightfully belonged to her. She turned to Father with that same defiant tilt of her chin and told him to answer the question himself, to tell everyone whose money it really was. Father shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, his shoulders drawing up tight, his jaw working like he was chewing on something hard. He said the money was mine. My sister corrected him, her voice smooth as butter, saying it was his money that he had asked me to hold for him, that she had seen him hand me that fat envelope and heard him say, "Keep this safe, not keep this for yourself," and if the money was his, and everything he had would eventually be hers, then she had simply taken what was coming to her. Mother straightened up with the dustpan full of glass and asked about the airplane tickets, where she had planned to go. Paris, my sister said, with her boyfriend, and they were supposed to leave tomorrow morning. She looked at me then, the coral lipstick smudged at the corner of her mouth, and said that now she could not leave because I had been foolish enough to confess that the money had gone to waste. And did I not find that a pity? The detective started to say something about needing to verify the source of the funds, but my sister cut him off, telling him that the money was already spent and if anyone needed to be arrested, it should be me because I had already admitted to everything. I walked over to the coffee table, pulled open the bottom drawer, and took out a brown paper envelope that still held a few $100s in smaller bills and a folded withdrawal slip from the bank. I handed that slip to the detective and told him the money came from my own account, withdrawn in the middle of last month because a supplier had demanded cash payment, and I had been holding it for my job, a job I had worked for 7 years. He held the slip up to the light, then pulled out his phone and began checking something, his thumbs moving across the screen in the quiet that had settled over the room. My sister stopped smiling. She looked at me with narrowed eyes and accused me of lying to her, of telling her the money was for Father. I told her I had never said any such thing. She insisted I had meant it, that I had left the envelope on the desk with a note, and I told her the note said supplier, Wednesday afternoon, and nothing else. That she had read what she wanted to read, because she had always believed everything in this house belonged to her by right. Father stepped forward, took the slip from the detective, examined it briefly, and handed it back. His fingers trembled, but his voice stayed steady when he told the detective that his daughter had not stolen anything, that this was her own savings taken without permission, and that they could resolve the matter privately. The detective asked if I was willing to drop the complaint, and I asked him what complaint, because I had not called anyone. He looked confused and said someone in the house had rung the emergency line and reported a theft. Mother spoke up from the kitchen doorway, drying her hands on her apron, and said she had made the call, that she had seen my sister carrying in those shopping bags and felt something was wrong. My sister's voice went small and soft when she asked Mother if she had called the police on her own daughter. Mother did not look at her. She looked at Father and reminded him that when she was 17 she had stolen $300 from his wallet, and he said she was young, and when she was 20 she had stolen his gas card and run up $800, and he called it a phase. But now she was 23 and had taken $2,000, and that was not a phase anymore. The detective put his notebook away and said this was a domestic matter best handled internally, but he could take a formal statement if the injured party insisted. Everyone looked at me, Father and my sister and Mother, who had turned off the kitchen faucet and stood listening in the sudden silence. I told them I would not press charges, but I had one condition. I told my sister to return the plane tickets, return the clothes, return the laptop, and give every penny back to me. She bit her lip and said some things could not be returned, that she had worn some of the clothes and cut off the tags, that the computer was already unboxed and set up, that the tickets were non-refundable because they had been purchased at a discount. I told her to return whatever she could and make up the difference herself. She said she did not have that kind of money, and I told her to sell her own bags, her own jewelry, whatever she owned, because she was old enough to face the consequences of her choices. She looked at Father with tears building in her eyes, but he turned away and stared out the window at the darkening sky. Mother leaned against the kitchen counter with her arms wrapped around herself like she was holding in a cold draft. The detective had reached the front door and told us we could come by the station for a written mediation record if we wanted one, that he would be there until 9. The door opened and closed, letting in another wave of heat, and we were alone again with the shopping bags scattered across the faded living room carpet. Father finally sat down on the sofa, sinking into the cushions like a sack of grain, and said he would pay the money back for her. I told him no, that she would pay it herself, and he asked how she could possibly manage that on her monthly salary. I told him that was not my problem, that if he paid for her mistakes she would never learn to stand on her own feet. Mother walked over with a glass of water and handed it to my sister, telling her to drink something and then start packing up the items for returns in the morning, that whatever could not be returned would come out of her paychecks until the debt was cleared. Half her wages every month until the last dollar was paid. My sister took the glass, her hands shaking, and said we were all ganging up on her. Mother told her that we were not ganging up on her, we were finally raising her right. Father rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands and told her that the money I had been saving was meant for grandmother's nursing home, for the private room she needed starting next month, that I had been putting away every extra dollar since January. My sister stopped crying and looked at me with an expression I could not name, something like a child fumbling for a light switch in a dark room, and she asked why I had never told her. I said it was my money and I did not need to explain how I planned to spend it, just like she did not need to clear her purchases with me. Mother took the glass from her hands and wrapped her arms around her, and my sister shook against her like a leaf in a storm. I walked into the kitchen, pulled a bottle of water from the refrigerator, and drank it standing at the counter, looking out at the darkness falling over the neighborhood. I heard her crying, heard Father sighing, heard Mother murmuring something low and steady. The sounds blended into a familiar hum, the background noise of family life. I knew what tomorrow would bring. She would go to the stores and argue with the clerks, call home crying when they would not take things back, Father would slip her extra cash when he thought no one was looking, and Mother would pretend not to notice. Grandmother would ask about the money in her soft, confused voice, and I would tell her it was from a good investment. We would still sit down for dinner together, all four of us, and my sister would still take the last piece of chicken from my side of the plate before I could reach for it. But something had shifted, something that could not be put back. The thin layer of ice we had all been skating on had cracked, and now everyone could see the water underneath. My sister's crying faded to sniffles, and Mother patted her back the way she used to when we were little, a steady rhythmic motion that had soothed countless scraped knees and broken toys. Father came up behind me and put his hand on my shoulder, heavy and warm, carrying something that might have been an apology or might have been gratitude. I could not tell which. I looked out the window at the summer night settling over the street and felt something I had not expected. The tightness in my chest loosened, not all at once but slowly, like a fist uncurling after being clenched for too long. There were nail marks in my palm where my fingers had pressed in, but no blood. Father asked Mother why she had called the detective in the first place. She looked at the shopping bags, at my sister's ruined makeup, at the stoop of Father's shoulders, and then at me. She said she had done it on purpose, because someone had to break the glass, had to let the air in, had to stop pretending that everything was fine when it clearly was not. She said it quietly, without anger, like she was stating a simple fact. My sister wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and asked if we could eat dinner now, because she was hungry. Mother nodded and walked into the kitchen, turned on the overhead light, and pulled out a pot from the cabinet. Father went over to the sofa and picked up one of the shopping bags, peering inside at the silk blouse that had slid halfway out of its tissue paper. He did not say anything, just folded the tissue back and laid the bag on the floor next to the others. I stayed by the counter, finishing my water, watching the kitchen light spill across the dining table where we would sit in 20 minutes, the same table we had sat at for 25 years. The chairs were worn in places, the wood scarred with the marks of countless meals. I thought about Grandmother in her room at the nursing home, the way she always asked about my sister first, always wanted to know if she was eating well and sleeping well and smiling enough. I thought about the envelope I had filled with cash, the careful count I had done 3 times before sealing it, the way I had hidden it in a drawer I thought was safe. I thought about my sister's bare feet crossing that floor, stepping over glass without a scratch, and I realized I had never really known her at all. Mother called out that dinner would be ready in 10 minutes. My sister shuffled into the bathroom to wash her face, and I heard the water running for a long time. Father sat on the sofa with his hands clasped between his knees, staring at the floor. I put the empty bottle in the recycling bin and walked back into the living room, past the shopping bags and the broken glass still sitting in the dustpan, past the open drawer of the coffee table where I had stored the remaining money and the bank slip. I sat down across from Father and waited. The house settled around us, the familiar creaks and hums of an old building adjusting to the cooling night air. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and then fell silent. My sister came out of the bathroom with a clean face, no coral lipstick, no mascara, just her bare skin and red-rimmed eyes. She looked younger than 23, looked like the girl she had been before she learned how to take things that did not belong to her. She walked over to the sofa and sat down between Father and me, close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off her arm. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she leaned over and rested her head on Father's shoulder, and he put his arm around her the way he used to when we were small enough to fit on his lap. Mother came out of the kitchen and stood in the doorway, watching us, and she smiled a small tired smile that did not quite reach her eyes. I looked at the 3 of them, these people I had lived with my whole life, and I knew we would find our way through this the way we had found our way through everything else. Not quickly, not cleanly, but somehow, eventually, because we had no other choice. The family we had was the only family we had, broken glass and all. The next morning I woke before the alarm and lay in bed listening to the house breathe around me. The air conditioner clicked on and off in its uneven rhythm, and somewhere downstairs a floorboard creaked under someone's weight. I pulled on jeans and a t-shirt and went down to find Mother already in the kitchen, her back to me as she ran water over a pan from last night's dinner. She asked if I had slept, and I told her I had not really, and she nodded without turning around. My sister came down 20 minutes later in yesterday's clothes, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail that left strands sticking out at odd angles. She looked at me across the kitchen table and said she would go to the mall as soon as the stores opened. I told her I would drive her. She started to argue, to say she could take the bus or call a friend, but Mother set down the coffee pot hard enough to clatter against the counter and said that I was going with her, no arguments. Father came in from the backyard, where he had been watering the tomatoes, and asked if we had decided what to return first. My sister picked at a loose thread on the edge of her shirt and said the laptop would be the easiest because she had kept the box and all the packaging. She had not even turned it on, she said, not once, because she had been waiting until the trip to set it up. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door and walked out to the car without waiting for her. She followed a minute later, climbing into the passenger seat and buckling her belt with a sharp click. We drove in silence through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, past the houses with their clipped lawns and the mailboxes that all looked exactly alike. The mall parking lot was nearly empty at that hour, just a few cars clustered near the department store entrance. I parked in the first space I found and killed the engine. The returns counter at the electronics store was manned by a young man with a piercing in his eyebrow who looked at the sealed laptop box and asked if anything was wrong with it. My sister told him she had changed her mind, that she did not need it anymore. He scanned the receipt I had pulled from the bag in the back seat, and the machine beeped and printed out a return slip without any further questions. $899 went back onto her credit card. She let out a long breath and said that was easier than she had expected. I told her we had 4 more stops. The clothing store was different. The woman behind the counter examined each item with the care of a detective looking for evidence, and she declared that 2 of the shirts had been worn, that she could see the faintest shadow of deodorant on the inner seams, and 3 other pieces had been final sale items clearly marked on the receipt. My sister's voice rose as she argued that she had barely tried them on, that the deodorant marks were nothing, that the final sale sign had not been visible when she bought them. The woman called the manager, a tired-faced man in a pressed shirt who offered us store credit instead of cash. My sister looked at me with her hands clenched at her sides, and I told her to take the credit, that it was better than nothing. She signed the form with a jerky motion and walked out of the store with a gift card worth $240, leaving the rest of the merchandise behind on the counter. The shoe store took back both pairs without comment, their soles untouched and the original tissue paper still intact. $160 went back to her card. The handbag boutique was less accommodating, citing a policy against returns on leather goods once they had left the premises, but the salesgirl took pity on us and offered an exchange for store credit, which my sister refused with a venomous look until I took the credit myself and pocketed it. By the time we reached the travel agency, the morning had stretched into early afternoon and we had not eaten anything. The agent on the phone confirmed that the tickets were non-refundable, non-transferable, and completely immovable. My sister sat in a plastic chair by the agency window and stared at the floor while I asked the agent if there were any exceptions, any waivers, any possible way to recover even a fraction of the cost. There was none. We walked back to the car in silence. The sun had climbed high enough to bake the asphalt, and the heat rose in shimmering waves off the hood of the car. My sister got in and sat without buckling her belt, just stared at the dashboard with her hands limp in her lap. She asked me how much she still owed, and I did the math in my head. The laptop had covered almost $900, the shoes and the store credit clothes about $400 total, the purses another $160 on the gift card I had taken. That left just over $2,000, plus the 2 tickets that had cost $500 each, non-refundable and gone forever. She had a gift card for the remaining store credit, which was worthless as cash, and no way to recoup the money for the flights. She said she could not pay back that much. I told her she would have to figure out a way. She turned to look at me, her face pale and drawn, and asked if I hated her. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel and thought about it for a long moment. I told her I did not hate her, that hate took more energy than I had left. She seemed to accept that as an answer and asked if we could stop for a sandwich on the way home. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove to a diner we used to go to when we were kids, a greasy spoon with faded vinyl booths and a jukebox that had not been updated since the 80s. We sat across from each other in a booth by the window, and she ordered a club sandwich that she barely touched, pushing the fries around her plate with a ketchup-smeared finger. She asked what grandmother would say if she knew. I told her grandmother would probably offer to pay off the debt herself, and then ask my sister why she had not bought her a new dress while she was at it. That pulled a small laugh out of her, weak and short-lived, but it was the first sound she had made all day that was not defensive or defeated. She looked out the window at the traffic moving past and told me she had not meant to spend it all at once. She had gone to the mall planning to buy one thing, just a jacket she had seen in a magazine, but then the jacket led to a pair of shoes, and the shoes led to a bag, and the bag led to everything else. The plane tickets had been her boyfriend's idea, a spur-of-the-moment thing when they realized they could both get the same days off work. She had wanted to say no, she said, but the words had not come out. I believed her, or at least I wanted to. I asked what she was going to do about the rest of the money. She shrugged and said she could sell some of her own things, the ones she had bought with her own wages, not the ones from yesterday's spending spree. She had a few designer bags from birthdays and Christmas, and a ring that our grandmother had given her when she turned 18. I told her the ring was a family heirloom, that she should not sell it, that she should ask mother or father for help before she went that far. She looked surprised that I would suggest that, and I was surprised at myself, but I meant it. When we got home, Father was in the garage doing something with a toolbox, and Mother was on the phone with the nursing home. My sister carried the gift cards and the return slips up to her room without a word. I stood in the kitchen and watched the shadows lengthen across the backyard, the tomato plants drooping in the afternoon heat. Father came in through the garage door and asked how it went. I told him everything except the tickets, but he must have seen something in my face because he asked if there was more. I told him about the plane tickets, the 500 each that would never come back. He sat down at the kitchen table and rubbed his forehead with his thumb and forefinger. He said he would talk to my sister about a payment plan, that she could hand over her entire paycheck for the next few months, if that was what it took. I told him she had offered to sell her ring, and his face went pale. He said she could not sell that ring, that it was the only thing his mother had ever given her, the only gift from grandmother that had any real value. He said he would find another way, that he had some money put aside, that he had not told anyone about it because he had been saving it for a new roof. I told him I did not want his roof money, that I wanted my sister to learn something from this, that the point was not the money itself, but the lesson attached to it. He nodded slowly and said I was right, but there was something in his voice that told me he would be slipping her cash on the side anyway, the way he always did. I did not say anything about it. We both knew how this would work, had seen it play out a dozen times before. That night at dinner my sister came downstairs with her hair brushed and a clean shirt on, some old thing from high school that had been in the back of her closet for years. She sat down at her usual place and helped herself to the casserole without being asked. Mother watched her with narrowed eyes, then said that the nursing home had called and grandmother was asking about us, about when we were coming to visit next. My sister looked up and said she would come with me this weekend if I wanted. Mother looked at me and I said that would be fine. Father cleared his throat and said he had been thinking about the payment plan, that he wanted to be fair to everyone, and that he had worked out a schedule that would let my sister pay off the remaining debt in 8 months without cutting too deep into her rent money. My sister nodded without arguing, which was unusual enough that Mother stopped eating and stared at her. She said she had been thinking too, and she was going to pick up extra shifts at the restaurant where she worked as a hostess, and maybe ask the manager if she could train to wait tables because the tips would help. I did not say anything, just kept eating, but I felt something shift inside me, something that had been stuck in place for a long time. After dinner, I washed the dishes while my sister dried them and put them away. We moved around the kitchen in the same rhythm we had as teenagers, before everything got complicated, before the stealing started and the lying started and the distance grew between us like a crack in a wall that no one knew how to patch. She handed me a plate and asked if I really meant what I said about not hating her. I took the plate from her hands and told her that hating her would be like hating myself, because we were the same blood and the same house and the same set of parents who had tried their best and mostly gotten it wrong. She put the last cup away in the cabinet and closed the door. She did not say anything else, but she did not need to. The silence between us had changed, softened into something that might eventually pass for trust if we gave it enough time. Mother came into the kitchen with a cup of tea and leaned against the counter, watching us with an expression that was half relief and half wariness, like a woman who had seen a storm pass, but did not quite believe the sky would stay clear. She asked if we were okay, and I said we were getting there. My sister said the same thing at the same time, and we both laughed a little, not because anything was funny, but because the coordination of it surprised us. Mother smiled and went back to the living room where Father was watching the evening news with the volume turned low. I dried my hands on the kitchen towel and looked out the window above the sink. The sun had gone down, leaving a purple streak across the horizon that faded into deep blue at the edges. My sister stood beside me, watching the same sky, and asked if I thought grandmother would be mad at her when she found out. I told her grandmother had already forgiven her, that the old woman had a way of seeing past the mistakes to the person underneath. She asked if that was true, and I told her I did not know, but it was a nice thing to believe. She nodded and said she would try to believe it too. The house settled around us, the familiar nighttime sounds of creaking pipes and settling wood. Upstairs I heard Father's heavy footsteps crossing the bedroom floor and the click of the lamp turning off. Mother called out that she was going to bed early, that the heat had worn her out. I told them both good night and stayed in the kitchen a few minutes longer, watching the last of the light disappear. My sister lingered by the counter, running her finger along the edge of the granite top, and asked me one more question before she went up to her room. She asked if I had really saved that money all summer long, every dollar from every overtime shift, without buying myself anything. I told her I had. She asked why, and I said because grandmother had asked me to take care of her, and I had meant it when I promised. My sister stood very still for a moment, and then she reached over and touched my arm, just a brief pressure of her fingers through the fabric of my shirt. She said she was sorry, not in a dramatic way, just the two words, quiet and honest. I told her I knew, and I meant that too. She went up the stairs with the soft tread of bare feet on wood, and the house fell silent around me. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark, listening to the night sounds outside, the cicadas and the distant hum of traffic from the highway a mile away. I thought about the money still missing, the $1,000 that would have to come from somewhere, and the plane tickets that had disappeared into thin air. I thought about my sister selling her grandmother's ring and the look on Father's face when I mentioned it. I thought about the 8 months ahead of her, the extra shifts and the tight budget, the lessons she would have to learn the hard way because she had never learned them the easy way. But I also thought about the way she had dried the dishes without being asked, the way she had touched my arm and said she was sorry, the way she had looked at the sky and asked if grandmother would forgive her. Those things felt small, but they felt real. I walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs, past my sister's closed door, past my parents' room where I could hear the low murmur of Father's voice, and into my own bed where I lay down and closed my eyes. The pillow was cool against my cheek and the fan on the ceiling turned slowly, pushing the hot air around the room. I fell asleep thinking about the summer, the long weeks of double shifts, the careful counting of dollars, and the promise I had made to a woman who was forgetting more every day. She had asked me to take care of her, and I had done my best. That would have to be enough. Saturday morning came clear and bright, the kind of summer day that promised heat by noon but still held a trace of coolness in the air. I found my sister already dressed when I came downstairs, wearing a simple cotton dress I had not seen in years, her hair pulled back in a neat braid. She asked if I was ready to go see grandmother, and I said I just needed to grab my bag. Mother stood by the front door with a container of homemade cookies and a vase of fresh-cut flowers from the garden. She handed them to my sister without a word, and my sister took them carefully, like they were made of glass. The nursing home sat on the edge of town, a low building with wide windows and a porch that wrapped around the front. The parking lot was half full with cars that had been there so long their tires had begun to flatten at the bottom. We walked through the automatic doors and down the hall toward grandmother's room. The smell hit me first, that particular blend of antiseptic and lavender air freshener that had become familiar over the past year. My sister slowed her steps as we approached the door, and I saw her take a breath before she pushed it open. Grandmother sat in her armchair by the window, the afternoon light falling across her lap where her hands lay folded over a crocheted blanket. She looked up when we came in, her eyes scanning our faces with the careful attention of someone who was not always sure who she was looking at. My sister crossed the room and knelt beside the chair, setting the cookies and flowers on the small table next to her. She took grandmother's hand and said hello, and grandmother stared at her for a long moment before her face broke into a smile. She said my sister's name, the full one she had not used in years, and my sister's eyes filled with tears. She blinked back quickly. I pulled up a chair and sat down on the other side of grandmother, and the old woman turned to look at me with the same slow recognition. She said she knew we were coming today, that she had been waiting since breakfast, and she asked if we had eaten properly. My sister laughed and said we had not, that we were waiting to have lunch with her. Grandmother nodded with satisfaction and said the food here was better than it used to be, which was not true, but we agreed with her anyway. The conversation drifted over the familiar ground. She asked about father's garden and mother's health and whether the cat still caught mice in the basement. I told her the cat was still doing his job, and she laughed, a dry rasping sound that rattled in her chest. My sister sat on the floor with her back against the wall, her legs stretched out in front of her, and she told grandmother about the restaurant where she worked, the customers who complained about everything, the new manager who did not know how to work the espresso machine. Grandmother listened with her head tilted, nodding at the right moments, asking questions that showed she was following every detail. After a while, my sister got up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden below where a few residents sat in wheelchairs around a birdbath. Grandmother watched her with those sharp old eyes and then turned to me. She asked if something was wrong. I started to say no, to brush it off the way I always did, but my sister turned around and answered before I could speak. She said she had done something stupid, something that had hurt me and cost a lot of money, and she was trying to fix it. Grandmother listened without changing expression, and then she asked how much. My sister told her the whole amount, the $2,000 that had been spent, and all the money that still had to be paid back. Grandmother reached over and patted my hand with her papery fingers. She said she knew about the money I had been saving for her room, that mother had told her over the phone a few weeks ago. She asked if I had really worked all summer for it, and I said yes, because that was what family did. She looked at my sister then, her gaze steady and clear, and told her that stealing from family was like stealing from yourself, because you were cutting off a piece of your own flesh and throwing it away. My sister nodded, her face reddening, and she said she understood that now, though I could see the shame sitting heavy on her shoulders. The nurse came in to check grandmother's blood pressure, and my sister helped her roll up her sleeve, her fingers careful and gentle on the old woman's thin arm. When the nurse left, grandmother reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a folded check. She handed it to me and said it was for the private room, that she had saved some money from her pension over the years and wanted to use it for this. I tried to give it back, told her I could manage, that I did not want her to give up her savings, but she closed my fingers around the paper and would not let go. She said she did not need the money anymore, that the state paid for most of her care, and the pension checks had been piling up in a drawer for years. She said it was a gift, not a loan, and I should take it and be grateful. My sister watched this exchange with her hands clenched in her lap, and when grandmother looked at her again, the old woman reached into the other pocket and pulled out a second check, this one smaller. She held it out to my sister, who stared at it like it might bite her. Grandmother said it was for her, not to spend on clothes or plane tickets, but to put toward what she owed, and if she was smart she would treat it as a loan from the old woman and pay it back one day, not in money but in visits, in phone calls, in showing up when she said she would. My sister took the check with trembling hands and did not even look at the amount before she folded it and put it in her pocket. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against grandmother's knee, and the old woman stroked her hair the way she had stroked mine 100 times when we were little. We stayed another hour, eating sandwiches from the cafeteria and listening to grandmother tell stories about her own sister, the one who had run away from home at 16 and never come back. She said families always had their troubles, always had one child who wandered and one who stayed, and the important thing was that the wandering one always had a place to come home to. My sister listened without interrupting, and when grandmother finished the story, she asked if grandmother thought she was the wandering one. Grandmother considered the question for a long moment, and then said she thought my sister was still finding her way, still figuring out who she wanted to be, and that there was no shame in that. We left in the late afternoon, the sun lower in the sky and the heat finally beginning to break. My sister was quiet on the drive home, the check folded and tucked into her dress pocket, and I saw her looking out the window at the trees and the houses passing by. She asked if I was mad at grandmother for giving her the money, and I told her I was not mad, that grandmother made her own decisions and always had. She nodded and said she was going to use that check to pay me back as soon as she could, that she would not spend a single cent of it on anything else. I told her I believed her, and I meant it more than I had meant anything in a long time. When we got home, Mother was in the garden pulling weeds, and Father was on the porch with a glass of lemonade. My sister went straight up to her room without a word, and I heard her open her closet door and start pulling things out, probably the things she had decided to sell to make up the rest of the debt. I sat down on the porch steps next to Father and told him about grandmother's checks, about the one for my fund and the one she had given to my sister. He listened without commenting, just sipped his lemonade and nodded. When I finished, he said his mother had always been the smartest person in the family, and she probably saw something in my sister that the rest of us had missed. Later that evening, my sister came downstairs with a small cardboard box filled with jewelry and handbags and a few sweaters she said she had bought but never worn. She set the box on the kitchen table and announced that she was having a yard sale tomorrow, and if we wanted anything we could have it first. Mother came in from the garden with dirt on her knees and looked through the box, pulling out a silver bracelet she had given my sister on her 16th birthday. My sister told her to take it, that it had been a gift and she should have it back. Mother shook her head and put the bracelet back in the box, saying it was my sister's to sell if she wanted, but she hoped she would think twice before letting go of things that had meaning. My sister picked up the bracelet and held it in her palm, turning it over to catch the light from the kitchen fixture. She said she had thought about it already, and she knew that selling it would hurt, but the real hurt was in what she had done, not in what she had to do to fix it. She put the bracelet back in the box and closed the lid. She said she would set up the yard sale at dawn, and anyone who wanted to help was welcome. Father asked if she had checked the weather, and she said she did not care about the weather. She was doing it rain or shine. The rest of the evening passed in a slow rhythm, Mother cooking dinner, Father reading the newspaper in his armchair, my sister going through her box of belongings and separating things into keep and sell piles. I sat on the back porch and watched the fireflies come out over the lawn, tiny points of light blinking on and off in the dusk. My sister came out after a while and sat down on the steps beside me, the box at her feet. She asked if I thought she would ever be able to make this right. I told her I did not know about right, but she was making a start, and that was more than she had ever done before. She laughed a little, a quiet sound in the dark, and said she had never realized how much work it took to be a good person. I laughed too, because that was something I had been learning my whole life, and I knew it was a lesson that never really ended. We sat there in the dark, two sisters on the back steps of the house we had grown up in, watching the fireflies and listening to the cicadas, and I felt something in my chest ease a little more. It was not forgiveness yet, not quite, but it was the road that led there, and we were finally walking down it together. The yard sale started at 7 in the morning, before the heat had time to settle over the neighborhood. My sister had dragged the folding tables from the garage onto the front lawn the night before, arranging her belongings in neat rows with the price tags she had spent an hour writing in her careful block letters. I came out with a cup of coffee and watched her place the last few items, a collection of costume jewelry and paperback novels and a lamp shaped like a pineapple that no one in the family had ever used. She looked up when she heard my footsteps and asked if the prices seemed fair, and I told her they seemed more than fair, that she was practically giving things away. The first customer arrived before 8, an older woman in a straw hat who picked through the jewelry box with the slow deliberation of someone who had all the time in the world. She bought 3 bracelets and a brooch for $8, and my sister pocketed the cash with a small, satisfied nod. By 9, the lawn was busy with neighbors and strangers, people who had seen the sign at the end of the street and turned in out of curiosity. My sister handled each transaction with a politeness I had not seen from her in years, answering questions about the items, bargaining gently when someone asked for a lower price, thanking each person with a genuine smile that softened the sharp edges of her face. Mother came out with a pitcher of lemonade and set it on the porch steps with a stack of paper cups. She watched from the doorway as my sister sold the silver bracelet that had been her 16th birthday gift, the one she had held in her palm the night before. The buyer was a young woman with a toddler in a stroller, and my sister helped her try it on and told her it was genuine sterling, that it had been a gift from her grandmother. The young woman paid $15 and walked away with the bracelet glinting on her wrist, and my sister stood there for a moment, watching her go. Mother came down the steps and put her hand on my sister's shoulder, just a brief touch, then went back inside. Father emerged from the garage with a box of old tools he had been meaning to sell for years, and he set them up at the end of one of the tables with prices he scrawled on masking tape. He and my sister worked side by side, him handing her change when she needed it, her helping him lift the heavier items onto the table. They did not say much to each other, but the quiet between them had a comfortable quality, like two people who had worked together for years and knew the rhythms of each other's movements. I sat on the porch steps with my coffee and watched the morning unfold, the steady trickle of customers, the small exchanges of money and goods, the way my sister's shoulders relaxed a little more with each sale. Around 11, a car pulled up that I recognized. It was the dark sedan that belonged to my sister's boyfriend, the one she had been planning to fly to Paris with. He got out and walked across the lawn with his hands in his pockets, his face carefully neutral. My sister froze for a moment with a ceramic vase in her hands, then set it down and walked over to meet him at the edge of the yard. I could not hear what they said to each other, but I saw her shake her head more than once, saw him gesture toward the house, and then toward the tables of her belongings. She stood her ground, arms crossed, and after a few minutes he turned and walked back to his car without looking back. She stood in the yard for a long moment after he drove away, then came back to her table and picked up the vase as if nothing had happened. Father approached her with a quiet question about whether she was all right, and she told him she was fine, that it had been a long time coming, and she was glad it was over. She did not elaborate, and he did not ask. He just squeezed her shoulder and went back to his tools. I watched my sister arrange the remaining items on her table, her movements efficient and deliberate, and I wondered how much of her anger and her defiance had been tied to him, how much of her spending had been about proving something to someone who was not even in the room. By noon, the yard sale had slowed to a crawl. Most of the desirable items had been sold, and what remained was the odd assortment of things no one had wanted, a chipped teapot and a stack of magazines and a single snow globe with a cracked base. My sister surveyed the leftovers and announced that she was donating everything that was left to the thrift store down the street. Mother came out and helped her pack the unsold items into cardboard boxes, and Father loaded them into the trunk of the car. My sister counted the cash in her worn leather wallet, her lips moving silently as she totaled the sales. She looked up at me and said she had made just over $400, not counting the check from grandmother, which meant she had about half of what she still owed. She asked if I would go with her to the thrift store to drop off the boxes, and I said I would. We drove in the same car we had taken to the mall 2 days before, but the silence between us felt different, lighter somehow, like the air after a storm has finally passed. She stared out the window at the passing streets and told me she had broken up with her boyfriend, that he had come by the house that morning to tell her he was moving to California, that he had expected her to be ready to leave with him. She said she had thought about it for a moment, about getting on a plane and starting over somewhere else, But then she had looked at the tables on the lawn, at the bracelets and the books and the lamp shaped like a pineapple. And she had realized that she did not want to be the kind of person who ran away from her mistakes. I did not say anything, just drove, and she kept talking, telling me things she had never told me before. She said she had always felt like the second child, the one who never quite measured up, the one who had to grab attention however she could. She said stealing the money had not been about the money at all, had been about wanting to feel powerful for once, like she could take something and make it hers without asking permission. She said she knew that was no excuse, that she had hurt me and grandmother and the whole family, but she wanted me to understand that she was not trying to be cruel, just trying to feel like she mattered. The thrift store took the boxes with a cheerful thanks, and we drove back through the residential streets, past the same lawns and mailboxes that had been there our whole lives. My sister said she was going to get a second job, that the restaurant would let her train as a waitress, but she needed more hours and more tips, and she had seen a help wanted sign at the diner where we had eaten lunch the other day. I told her that was a good plan, that the diner was always busy and the tips were decent. She nodded and said she would stop by that evening to fill out an application. When we got home, the yard was empty, the tables folded and leaning against the garage wall, the remnants of the sale swept into a pile on the grass. Mother brought out sandwiches and we ate on the back porch, the four of us around the wrought iron table that had been on the patio since before I was born. My sister ate with an appetite I had not seen in days, and she talked about the diner job and the waitress training and the schedule she was going to propose to the manager. Father listened with his usual calm attention, offering small pieces of advice about picking up extra shifts and saving the tips. Mother asked about the boyfriend, and my sister said he was gone, that it was for the best, and Mother did not press further. After lunch, my sister went inside to change out of her yard sale clothes, and I stayed on the porch with Father. He said he had noticed something different in her today, something that looked like maturity, and he hoped it would stick. I told him I hoped the same thing, but I knew better than to count on it. He laughed at that, a short, dry sound, and said I had always been the practical one, the one who kept both feet on the ground. He said that was not a bad thing, but it was also not a bad thing to have hope. My sister came back out in a clean shirt and asked if I wanted to go with her to the diner to pick up the application. I said I would drive her. We walked to the car together, and I saw Mother and Father watching us from the porch, their faces turned toward us like sunflowers toward the light. I did not know if my sister would stick to her plan, did not know if she would pay back the money or keep her promises or become the person she was trying to become. But I knew that for the first time in a long time, she was trying, and that counted for more than I had realized. The diner was quiet in the late afternoon, the lunch rush over, and the dinner crowd not yet arrived. My sister went inside to ask for the manager, and I waited in the car, watching the door through the windshield. She came out 20 minutes later with a folded application in her hand and a small smile on her face. She got into the passenger seat and told me the manager remembered her from the other day, remembered the club sandwich she had barely touched, and had offered her a trial shift on Monday. She said she would fill out the application tonight and bring it back in the morning. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the road, and the world looked different than it had a few days ago, softer and more forgiving. My sister turned on the radio and hummed along to a song I did not recognize, her head bobbing slightly with the rhythm. She did not say anything about the future or the debt or the mistakes she had made. She just hummed and looked out the window, and that was enough for the moment. That was all any of us could ask for. Monday morning came with a heavy humidity that pressed against the windows like a wet blanket. My sister left the house before 7, dressed in the black pants and white button-down shirt she had dug out of the back of her closet, her hair pinned up in a style that made her look older than 23. She stopped in the kitchen to grab a granola bar from the counter and told Mother she would be back after the lunch rush, that the manager wanted her to shadow a waitress for the first few hours. Mother handed her a thermos of coffee and told her to drink it all, that the diner coffee was weak and watery and would not keep her alert through the morning. I watched from the kitchen window as she walked down the driveway to her car, a battered sedan that had been passed down from father when she got her license. She paused at the driver's door and looked back at the house, just a quick glance, then got in and pulled away. The day stretched out in front of me with no particular shape. I had taken the week off from work to deal with the money situation, and the sudden emptiness of the hours felt strange after months of double shifts. Mother asked if I wanted to help her sort through the linen closet, and I said yes, because it was better than sitting around. We spent the morning folding sheets and towels that had not been touched in years, setting aside the ones that were too worn to keep. Mother worked in her quiet, methodical way, and I matched her rhythm without thinking. She asked if I had heard from the nursing home about the private room, and I told her I had put the deposit down on Friday, that grandmother would be moving in 2 weeks. She nodded and folded a fitted sheet with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. She said she was proud of me for handling everything, for saving the money and making the arrangements and not letting the situation fall apart. I told her I had not done it alone, that father had helped with the paperwork and grandmother had given me the check, and even my sister was trying to contribute. Mother stopped folding for a moment and looked at me with an expression that was hard to read. She said she had noticed my sister's efforts, the way she had worked at the yard sale without complaining, the way she had filled out the job application the same night she brought it home. She said she had worried about that girl for years, had worried that she would never learn to stand on her own, had worried that all the small allowances and forgiven debts were making her weaker instead of stronger. We finished the linen closet by noon and ate a quiet lunch of leftover casserole. The house felt empty without my sister's presence, without the clatter of her footsteps on the stairs or the sound of her voice on the phone. Mother said she had called the nursing home to check on grandmother, and the nurse had said she was having a good day, that she had eaten all her breakfast and remembered the name of her favorite aide. I said I would visit again later in the week, maybe bring her some of the cookies she liked from the bakery downtown. The afternoon crept by. I went out to the garden and pulled weeds while Mother trimmed the hedges, and we worked in companionable silence under the heavy sun. The tomato plants were heavy with fruit, and I picked a few that had ripened to a deep red, carrying them inside to set on the kitchen counter. Mother came in behind me and said she would make sauce with them tomorrow, that it was too hot to stand over a stove tonight. My sister came home at 3, earlier than I had expected. She walked through the back door with her shirt untucked and her hair coming loose from its pins, but there was a lightness in her step that had not been there when she left. She set her bag on the kitchen table and announced that the manager had offered her a permanent waitress position, that she would work the dinner shift every night and the lunch shift on weekends, and that she had already made $40 in tips from the lunch crowd. Mother set down the knife she was using to slice the tomatoes and asked if she was sure about working that many hours. My sister nodded and said she had done the math, and with the waitress tips and her regular hostess shifts, she could pay me back in 6 months instead of 8. She turned to me and pulled a wad of cash from her apron pocket, crumpled 1s and 5s and a few 10s, and she counted out $46 on the kitchen table. She pushed the pile toward me and said it was the first payment, that she would bring me cash every night after her shift until the debt was cleared. I looked at the crumpled bills spread across the table and felt something knot in my chest. I told her to keep some for herself, to save a little for the days when tips were slow, but she shook her head and said she had already taken out her bus fare and a few dollars for lunch. The rest was mine. I took the money and folded it into my pocket without counting it again. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and went upstairs to change out of her work clothes. Mother picked up the knife and went back to slicing the tomatoes, but I saw her wipe her eyes with the back of her hand before she turned away. That evening, my sister came down in her old jeans and a faded t-shirt and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook she had found somewhere. She had written out a payment schedule, a detailed plan that broke down how much she would owe each week based on her projected tips and her regular paychecks. She showed it to me with a pride that reminded me of the old days, when she had brought home spelling tests with gold stars on top and spread them across the table for everyone to admire. I looked at the columns of numbers, the careful additions and subtractions, and I told her it looked solid, that she had clearly put thought into it. Father came in from the garage and looked over her shoulder at the notebook, nodding slowly as he scanned the numbers. He said he was impressed that she had accounted for taxes and bus fare and even a small emergency fund. My sister beamed at the praise, and I saw Mother watching from the stove with a smile she did not try to hide. We ate dinner together, the four of us around the same old table, and the conversation flowed easily in a way it had not in years. My sister talked about the other waitresses at the diner, the regular customers who always ordered the same thing, the cook who had a tattoo of a mermaid on his forearm. We laughed at her stories, real laughs that filled the kitchen and pushed back the evening quiet. After dinner, my sister cleared the table without being asked, and she washed the dishes while Mother dried them and put them away. Father went to the living room to watch the news, and I sat on the back porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the fireflies blink in the dark. My sister came out after a while and sat beside me, her feet tucked under her on the porch swing. She asked if I thought she could really do it, could really pay off the debt and start over and become a different person. I told her I thought she was already becoming that person, that the days of work and the yard sale and the payment schedule were proof that she was changing. She swung the porch swing with her bare foot, back and forth, the chains creaking in the quiet night. She said she had thought about what grandmother said, about the wandering one and the one who stayed, and she realized she had been wandering for a long time without knowing where she was going. She said she was tired of being lost, tired of taking things that did not belong to her, tired of being the one who always needed to be saved. She wanted to be someone who could save herself for once. I did not have an answer to that, so I just sat beside her in the dark and let the silence hold us. The fireflies kept blinking, and the cicadas kept humming, and the house behind us glowed with the warm light of a family settled in for the night. My sister leaned her head on my shoulder, the way she had done when we were children, and I let her stay there until the last of the day's heat faded and the air turned cool enough to drive us back inside. She did not say anything else, and neither did I. Some things did not need words, just the quiet presence of someone who was still there, still willing to wait and see what happened next. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. My sister worked her double shifts with a discipline that surprised everyone, coming home each night with her apron pockets stuffed with crumpled tips and her feet swollen from standing. She counted out her payments on the kitchen table every evening without fail, pushing the bills across to me with the solemnity of someone making a sacred offering. I had stopped counting the total after the first week, trusting her to keep her own record, and she showed me her notebook regularly with the pride of a student showing off good grades. Father had taken to picking her up from the diner on nights when her car would not start, which was becoming more frequent. He would wait in the parking lot with the engine running and the radio turned low, and she would climb into the passenger seat smelling of coffee and fried food and talk about the customers who had been generous with their tips and the ones who had been difficult. They developed a routine around those late-night drives, a shared ritual that excluded Mother and me, and I could hear them laughing together in the driveway before they came inside. The private room at the nursing home was ready. Grandmother had moved in on a Tuesday, and I had gone to visit her the next day with fresh flowers and a stack of magazines. She sat in her new armchair by a window that faced a small garden, and she told me the room was bigger than her first apartment had been, which was not true, but I let her have it. She asked about my sister, about the job and the payments, and whether she was sticking to her plan. I told her she was, that the notebook was full of numbers and the tips were coming in steady. Grandmother nodded with the satisfaction of someone who had known all along how things would turn out. My sister visited grandmother on her day off, taking the bus across town because her car had finally given out and she did not want to ask Father for another ride. She brought a box of the bakery cookies grandmother liked and a small potted plant she had bought with her own money, not with tip money or loan money, but with the small allowance she had set aside for herself. She told me later that grandmother had cried when she saw the plant, had said it reminded her of the garden she used to keep when she was young and could still kneel in the dirt. My sister had stayed for 3 hours, longer than any of us usually managed, and she had helped the nurses change grandmother's sheets and had read aloud from one of the magazines I had brought. I noticed the changes in her gradually, the way she held herself straighter, the way she answered Mother's questions without deflecting, the way she offered to help with dinner even when she was exhausted. She had stopped wearing the expensive clothes she had bought with the stolen money, had put them away in her closet, and told me she would sell them on a resale website when she had the time. She wore her old jeans and her faded t-shirts and looked more comfortable in them than she ever had in the designer things. The coral lipstick stayed in its tube on her dresser untouched. One evening, Father came in from the garage with a letter in his hand. He sat down at the kitchen table and unfolded it slowly, reading it through twice before he spoke. He said it was from the man who had owned the diner, an old friend who was retiring and looking to sell the business. Father had mentioned to him that my sister was working there, that she was learning the trade and doing well, and the man had written to say he was offering her first refusal on the purchase, if she wanted it, at a price that was far below market value. My sister stared at the letter like it was written in a foreign language. She asked Father why the owner would do that, why he would offer a waitress with no savings a deal that made no financial sense. Father leaned back in his chair and said the owner had known him for 30 years, had watched him raise 2 daughters and struggle through hard times and come out the other side. He said the man had no children of his own, no one to leave the business to, and he wanted to see it go to someone young and hungry and willing to work. He looked at my sister and told her he knew she had no savings, but he had some money put aside, not the roof money but a small inheritance from his own father that he had never touched. He offered to lend her the down payment, to co-sign on the loan, to help her buy the diner if she wanted it. My sister sat in silence for a long moment, her hands flat on the table, her eyes fixed on the letter. She asked if this was a test, if Father was offering her something she would fail at just to prove she could not be trusted. Mother came to the table and sat down beside her, and she said it was not a test, it was a chance, and if my sister did not want it she could say no and no one would think less of her. My sister looked at me across the table, and I shrugged and said it was her decision, that she had to make it for herself. She asked for a day to think about it, and Father folded the letter and gave it to her to keep. She took it up to her room and did not come down for the rest of the evening. Mother and Father sat in the living room with the television on but not really watching it, and I went out to the back porch to watch the fireflies and the darkening sky. I thought about the diner and the long hours and the oily smell that clung to my sister's clothes, and I tried to imagine her owning it, being the one who made the schedules and ordered the supplies and dealt with the difficult customers. I could see it, I realized, more clearly than I could have a month ago. The change in her had been slow but real, and it made the impossible seem possible. The next morning, my sister came downstairs with the letter in her hand and a decision on her face. She sat down at the breakfast table and told Father she would do it, that she would take the offer and learn the business and pay him back every cent of the down payment. She said she was scared, that she had never run anything before, that she did not know how to manage a budget or handle payroll or fix a broken espresso machine. But she was more scared of staying the same, of being the person who always took and never gave, of looking back at her life in 20 years and seeing only a trail of mistakes she had never tried to fix. Father reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing it once hard. He said he would call the owner that morning and start the paperwork. Mother got up from her chair and came around the table to hug my sister from behind, wrapping her arms around her shoulders and pressing her cheek against her hair. I sat across from them and watched the scene unfold, this small moment of family that felt like a turning point, a hinge swinging open onto a different future than any of us had expected. My sister pulled back from Mother and looked at me, her eyes bright with something that might have been tears or might have been determination. She asked if I would help her learn the business side of things, the bookkeeping and the ordering and the scheduling, because she knew I was good with numbers and detail and she was not. I told her I would, that I had some vacation time saved up and could take a few weeks to work with her at the diner before I went back to my regular job. She nodded and smiled, and the smile was the most unguarded one I had seen from her in years. Father went to the phone to call the owner, and Mother started making a second pot of coffee, and my sister sat at the table with the letter spread out in front of her, reading it again and again like she was memorizing every word. I watched her trace the lines with her finger and saw the way her lips moved silently as she read, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest that I had not expected. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close, something that felt like the beginning of trust. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls and excited talk. Father came back from the garage with a stack of old financial records he had kept from his own business years ago, and he spread them across the dining table and walked my sister through the basics of profit and loss and operating expenses. She asked questions, good ones, and wrote down answers in the same notebook she was using to track her debt payments. Mother brought out sandwiches, and we ate at the table surrounded by papers and numbers, and the house felt full in a way it had not felt in a long time. That afternoon, my sister and I drove to the diner together, her car still in the shop, and mine the only option. She asked me to park around the back so she could show me the kitchen and the storage room and the small office where the owner kept his books. We walked through the empty dining room, past the booths and the counter and the jukebox that had not been updated since the 80s, and she pointed out the things she would change and the things she would keep exactly the same. She spoke with a confidence I had not heard before, a certainty that came from knowing what she wanted and being willing to work for it. We sat in the owner's office, she in his worn leather chair and me on a folding stool, and she made a list of questions she wanted to ask him about the suppliers and the equipment and the lease. She wrote in her careful block letters, crossing out and rewriting, and when she was done, she looked up at me and asked if I thought the owner would think she was foolish. I told her the owner would think she was exactly what he was looking for, someone young and eager and willing to learn. She folded the list and put it in her pocket, and we walked back through the dining room and out into the late afternoon sun. The sky was a deep blue with clouds gathering on the horizon, the kind of clouds that promised rain by evening. My sister stood in the parking lot and looked back at the diner, the peeling paint and the flickering sign and the cracked asphalt. She said it was not much to look at, but it could be. She said she wanted to make it into something she could be proud of, something that would make Father proud too. I stood beside her and looked at the same building, the same peeling paint and flickering sign, and I saw what she saw. A beginning, not an ending. A chance to build something from the ground up, brick by brick and dollar by dollar and day by day. We drove home in the growing dark, the first drops of rain hitting the windshield as we turned onto our street. My sister turned on the radio and hummed along to a song she knew, her head nodding in time with the beat. She did not talk about the debt or the job or the future. She just hummed and watched the rain streak across the glass, and I drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the door. The house lights were on when we pulled into the driveway, warm and welcoming, and I saw Mother's silhouette in the kitchen window, watching for us. My sister waved at her through the rain, and Mother waved back, and we ran from the car to the porch with our hands over our heads, laughing at the sudden downpour. Inside, Father had started a fire in the hearth even though it was summer, a small one just for the comfort of it. We sat on the floor around the living room, the four of us, with cups of tea and the rain drumming on the roof, and my sister told them about her visit to the diner, about the questions she had written down and the plans she had started to make. They listened with the same attention they had always given me when I came home with good news, and I realized that the attention had always been there, that I had just stopped noticing it. My sister leaned against the sofa and closed her eyes, looking peaceful for the first time I could remember, and I felt that warmth in my chest again, spreading like a slow fire through the cold places. The sale of the diner went through at the end of the month, a flurry of paperwork and handshakes and a notary who smelled of menthol cigarettes. My sister signed her name on every line with a steady hand, and when the old owner handed her the keys, she stood in the parking lot and looked at them like they were made of gold. Father had co-signed the loan, and Mother had emptied a small savings account to help with the initial operating costs, and I had taken a week of unpaid leave to help her reorganize the kitchen and update the menu board. The first day she opened as the new owner, she wore the same black pants and white shirt she had worn on her first shift, and she stood behind the counter with a nervous smile that faded into genuine warmth when the first regular customer walked through the door. The diner had been called Stella's for 40 years, named after the old owner's wife who had passed away a decade ago. My sister changed the name to something simpler, just the street address, because she said she did not want to trade on someone else's memory. She painted the walls a pale yellow and replaced the cracked vinyl on the booths with a deep green fabric that made the place look brighter and more alive. She kept the jukebox because the regulars would have revolted if she had gotten rid of it, and she updated the menu with a few dishes she had learned from Mother, simple comfort food that reminded people of home. I helped her with the books in the evenings, sitting in the small office with the green leather chair and the stack of receipts and the calculator that had been there since before I was born. She learned quickly, faster than I had expected, and by the second week she was reconciling the daily cash drawer without needing my help. She had a natural head for numbers, an aptitude she had never shown before because she had never had reason to use it. She said it felt like solving puzzles, fitting the pieces together until everything balanced, and she liked the satisfaction of a clean column of figures. The debt to me was paid off by the end of the summer. She had made the final payment on a Friday afternoon, counting out the last stack of crumpled bills on the kitchen table and pushing them toward me with a grin that spread across her whole face. I took the money and folded it into my wallet without counting it, and she asked if I was going to check her math. I told her I trusted her, and the look on her face was worth more than the money ever could have been. She had kept her word, had worked until her hands were raw and her feet were swollen and her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, and she had done it without complaint and without shortcuts. The night of the final payment, Mother cooked a special dinner, a roast chicken with all the trimmings, and we sat around the table like we were celebrating a holiday. My sister raised her glass of water and made a toast to the family, to the patience and the second chances and the willingness to let someone fail and then try again. She said she knew she did not deserve the grace she had been given, but she was going to spend the rest of her life trying to earn it. Father wiped his eyes with his napkin and pretended he had gotten something in them, and Mother reached across the table and squeezed my sister's hand. After dinner, we cleared the table together, the four of us moving in the same rhythm we had developed over weeks of shared chores. My sister washed the dishes and I dried them, and Father put away the leftovers while Mother wiped down the counters. The kitchen was warm with steam from the sink and the soft glow of the overhead light, and the sound of our movements filled the space with a music that felt like home. My sister handed me the last plate and said she had something to tell me, something she had been holding on to for a while. She said she had found a therapist, someone she was seeing once a week to talk about the stealing and the lying and the years of feeling like she was never enough. She said it was helping, that she was learning to understand why she did the things she did, and she wanted me to know that she was not just changing her behavior, she was changing the root of it. I set down the dish towel and looked at her, really looked, and I saw something in her face that had not been there before. A calmness, a steadiness, a sense of someone who had stopped running and had finally planted her feet. I told her I was proud of her, that the therapy was the bravest thing she had done yet. She laughed and said the bravest thing she had done was admitting to the detective that she had spent the money, but she was glad I thought the therapy was up there. We hugged in the kitchen, a real hug that lasted longer than our usual quick embraces, and when we pulled apart, Mother was watching from the doorway with tears on her cheeks. The diner thrived through the autumn. My sister had a gift for remembering people's orders, for knowing when a regular needed a refill and when a newcomer needed a recommendation. She hired 2 part-time waitresses and a cook who had been out of work for months, and she paid them fair wages and treated them with the same respect she had been learning to give herself. Customers started coming back more often, bringing friends and family, filling the booths and the counter seats until there was a wait on weekend mornings. She called me one night to tell me she had made a profit in her 3rd month, that the numbers were finally in the black, and I heard the joy in her voice before she even said the words. Father stopped by the diner every morning for coffee, a ritual that had started during the first week and never stopped. He sat at the counter and read the newspaper and talked to the regulars, and my sister would bring him a refill without being asked and sometimes slip a pastry onto his plate that she said was a mistake from the kitchen. They developed a shorthand, a way of communicating without words that I had never seen between them before. Mother visited on weekends, helping with the lunch rush when things got busy, and she and my sister worked side by side like they had been doing it for years instead of months. I went to the nursing home to see grandmother on the first Sunday of October, and I brought my sister with me. We sat in the private room by the window, and my sister told grandmother about the diner and the profit and the new menu items she had created. Grandmother listened with her head tilted and her old hands folded on her lap, and when my sister finished, she reached out and touched her cheek with a papery finger. She said she had always known there was a strong woman inside that girl, had always known it would take time and struggle to bring her out. My sister leaned into the touch and closed her eyes, and I watched the two of them, the oldest and the youngest, connected by something that went beyond blood. The drive home was quiet, the autumn leaves a blur of red and gold along the roadside. My sister sat in the passenger seat with her window cracked and the cool air blowing through her hair, and she asked me if I thought she had finally become the person she was supposed to be. I thought about the question for a long time, watching the road unroll in front of us. I told her I did not think there was a final version of anyone, that we were all just works in progress, but she was closer to the person she wanted to be than she had ever been before. She nodded and said that was enough, that the journey was the point, not the destination. That evening, we sat on the back porch in the cool darkness, wrapped in sweaters against the autumn chill. The fireflies had gone for the season, and the cicadas had fallen silent, and the yard was a deep shadow under the half-moon. My sister leaned against the porch rail and told me she had been thinking about the envelope on my desk, the one she had taken on that hot summer day. She said she could still see it in her mind, the brown paper and the way the light had caught the edge of it when she pulled it from the drawer. She said she was not proud of what she had done, but she was grateful for the lesson it had taught her, the lesson about consequences and family and the slow, painful work of becoming someone worthy of trust. I leaned beside her and looked at the same dark yard, the same porch steps, the same house where we had grown up and fought and made up and fought again. I told her I had been thinking about it too, about the moment the doorbell rang and the detective asked his question, and I had said the money was mine. I had been carrying the weight of that moment for months, the weight of protecting her and then exposing her, and then watching her try to fix what she had broken. But I had also been carrying the weight of something else, the weight of years of small resentments and unspoken grievances, and the slow drift that had separated us long before the money ever appeared. She reached over and took my hand, her fingers cold from the night air, and she said she was sorry for all of it, not just the money but the years of taking and expecting and never giving back. She said she had been a difficult sister, a difficult daughter, a difficult person, and she knew she had a long way to go before she could make up for all of it. I squeezed her hand and told her that she had already started making up for it, that the diner and the payments and the therapy were proof enough. We stayed on the porch until the cold drove us inside, and when we walked into the kitchen, Mother had made hot chocolate and set out 4 mugs on the table. Father came in from the living room, and we sat around the table like we were children again, sipping the warm drink and talking about nothing important. My sister told a story about a customer who had tried to pay for his meal with a lottery ticket, and we laughed at the absurdity of it, the image of a grown man arguing that the ticket was as good as cash. The laughter filled the kitchen, warm and easy, and I caught my sister's eye across the table and saw the same thing I had been seeing in her for weeks. A light, a steadiness, a quiet assurance that she was where she was supposed to be. Later, when the mugs were empty and the story was told, we went upstairs to our separate rooms, the familiar creaks of the stairs under our feet. My sister stopped at her door and looked back at me, her face half lit by the hallway lamp. She said thank you, just the 2 words, but they carried everything she could not say. I told her she was welcome, and I meant it with my whole heart. I went into my room and closed the door and sat on the edge of my bed, looking out the window at the dark yard where the moonlight silvered the grass. The summer had been a hard one, full of heat and anger and the slow work of repair. But the work had been done, and the repair was real, and the family we had was still standing, battered but whole. I lay down and pulled the covers up, the familiar weight of the blanket settling over me. Through the wall, I could hear my sister moving around her room, The soft sounds of drawers opening and closing, the click of her lamp turning off. The house settled into its nighttime silence, and I closed my eyes and let myself drift toward sleep. The last thought I had was about the envelope, the brown paper, and the neatly folded cash, and the note that had said "Supplier, Wednesday afternoon." I had hidden it in a drawer I thought was safe, but I knew now that no hiding place was ever truly safe from the people who knew us best. The only safety was in trust, and trust was something you had to build, brick by brick, day by day. My sister had started building, and I had started letting her, and that was enough. That was everything.